they're changing their diet and they're reversing diseases that people said, like, no, that's not possible. You can't do that. Well, I'm sorry, but it is.
Today, I'm talking to Dr. Anthony Chaffee. Dr. Chaffee is a well-known carnivore and has been eating this way for over a decade in total. As Dr. Chaffee is such a popular and well-known carnivore, you may have seen him interviewed before. So throughout our discussion, I've tried to ask him questions that you may not have heard him give his thoughts on. Just before we get started, do me a massive favor and smash like and also subscribe. This really helps out my channel and I am grateful for your support. Let's talk to Dr. Chaffee.
Good morning, Dr. Chaffee. Thank you so much for taking the time today to be with us.
Oh, not a problem. Happy to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
So could we just start by talking about your experience on carnivore? You've been on carnivore now for 20 plus years. Is that right?
Well, I started it 20 plus years ago and then did like a full 5 year sort of chunk where I was very strict. And then I sort of slipped off of it when I was living in England. Just I didn't have the same access to food. Some of the meat was breaded, and I sort of convinced myself that maybe a bit of breading or crumbing wasn't that big of a deal. But I actually did notice that my performance and my fitness wasn't as good. I was getting aches and pains and soreness and stiffness that I hadn't really had before. And I didn't really know what that was. But looking back, that was when I started including things. And the main thing that did was it got me out of the mindset of I'm just not going to eat any plants at all, and I'm just going to avoid them completely. And so things started slipping back in, and I started eating, a bit more vegetables and salads and some carbs and things like that. Always pretty healthy, clean, well, as insofar as it's deemed healthy, but whole foods in any case, and always centered on meat. But I included some of the other things, and then sort of 5-6 years ago now, I rediscovered this and came to the realization that no, humans are carnivores as a species. It's just the kind of animal that we are. And that's what I was doing for those 5 years between 20 and 25. And that's why I felt better than I ever have in my entire life in that chunk of years. And immediately after that at 25, but just not eating exactly the same, I didn't feel anything close to what I did at 25 when I was doing that exact same thing, or 22. And I remember thinking to myself at the time when I was 25, why don't I feel as just superhuman amazing as I normally do? Am I not working as hard? Am I not pushing myself? Am I just over the hill? Is 25 the hump? As they say, you get into your late 20s and that's the shit. It's all downhill from there. And, but looking back, that's what it was. And so at that point I was 38 and I went back onto a strict carnivore diet, got rid of all the vegetables and everything that I was eating. I was really only eating vegetables and meat, really. And just by getting rid of the vegetables and eating a lot more meat, I dramatically improved my health. I lost about 10 kilos in 10 days. And then I stayed the same weight, but then I started stacking on muscle and shredding fat, and my body composition just started transforming. I was working very hard as well. I was lifting weights and playing rugby and pushing myself very hard. But I was 38. Most people say you can't really do that at 38 and have those sorts of results. But I did, and I felt amazing. And at 38, I felt as good as I did at 22 when I was doing this diet. And I felt better. And then at 27, when I was still playing rugby at a very high level and training all the time, but just not eating in the same way. So I saw a dramatic difference even in that stage. I'm 43 now, and I still feel absolutely amazing. My body works better than it did at any other stage in my life, except for those first 5 years of doing this in my early 20s.
Nice. So you are a medical doctor. How does that go down at work? How do people react to that?
It's most people are actually pretty interested. I'm sure there are a lot of people that think like, well, that's that crazy meat guy, he's nuts. but there are a number of people that will come up to me. They'll hear about the way I'm eating, and because people will be interested, they'll sort of ask me about it. Like, so what what's this all about? And, we'll just have a conversation. A lot of people are interested in it because they see that I'm in pretty good shape, or at least I appear to be in good shape. I mean, in good physique, even though I don't have the time to work out all that much. I do maintain a low body fat percentage and I maintain most of my musculature. I get a lot better if I work out a lot. Obviously, everyone would. But even without working out, like during COVID, I didn't have access to a gym. I didn't have home gyms. And I maybe did push-ups twice, and I went running stairs maybe twice as well. But during that time, people were like, how can you stay in good shape? How do you stay in good shape? Do you have a home gym? How do you work out all that to maintain that? I'm like, I haven't really worked out at all. And they really couldn't believe that. And I just impress upon them like, no, this is all diet. Diet does this all. Think of an animal in the zoo. Think of a lion in the zoo. It's living in a box. It's a cage. It's not exercising. It's not chasing. It's not hunting. But they look extremely lean and strong and powerful because they are. Same with other animals in the zoo. I've never seen a fat giraffe or a fat zebra if they're fed what they're supposed to be fed. And if you feed them outside of what they're supposed to be fed, they actually can get fat and sick and unhealthy. And that's the same with us. So, I was an example of a human in captivity in the zoo where I was eating what I was supposed to eat, but I wasn't exercising, but I still maintained that physique. And so that made people think like, okay, well, maybe there's something to this. Maybe I'll ask some questions. And, you get the classic questions. Okay, well, what about cholesterol? Doesn't red meat cause cancer? Don't you need fiber? Don't you, miss some nutrients when you're only eating meat? And of course, those are completely legitimate questions, but they have answers. And the answers are that you get everything you need from meat. You don't get anything you don't need from meat. We're biologically designed to eat meat. This is how we're adapted. Our biology, our physiology is set up to eat and process meat, especially red meat. And it's not really set up or designed to do that with plants. And plants can have defense chemicals and other sorts of things that can harm us to varying degrees. Some are fairly benign, but others are deadly. In fact, most plants are deadly. And so we do need to take that into consideration when we're thinking what is optimal for our diet. I've heard the argument that, well, even that people will concede that, yes, humans evolved eating meat and that we've been eating meat for millions of years, but that may not be optimal. What we're biologically designed for isn't necessarily optimal. Maybe this other thing that we're not biologically designed for, that we don't have the physiology to break down and absorb nutrients for optimally, that we don't have all the physiology and defense mechanisms to break down these harmful chemicals, that maybe that's optimal. Not the thing that we're biologically adapted for, which makes absolutely zero sense biologically. That's an assertion that someone has made that is absolutely based in no reality and has no evidence for. If by definition, if you're biologically designed to eat something and do something, that's going to be optimal for you. It's going to be more optimal than something you're not biologically designed to eat or utilize, right? Because we have all the mechanics to extract all the nutrients. The bioavailability is such that you get all the nutrients out of it. And you have the physiology to either eliminate out harmful chemicals, or maybe they don't even have harmful chemicals. Most muscle meat and tissue doesn't need to have harmful chemicals in it because the animal is able to defend itself in other ways and by other means. And so you don't need to go through that as you do with plants. So, a lot of people have questions, but there are answers for them. And so more and more people have actually been interested. A lot of people are eating a lot more meat around that I've been interacting with. And many have actually even tried a carnivore diet or continue on with a carnivore diet. And some are able to maintain that. Others, for social reasons and logistical reasons, they think, well, I live with other people and it's hard to get them on board and things like that. But most people are actually quite interested. I haven't really gotten any bad pushback by, okay, that's crazy or anything like that, from the hospital setting anyway. Certainly people online will do that, but actually not even all that much. Most people are actually quite just interested, even vegans and people that have been vegetarian or plant-based for a long time. They're coming at this from, generally from the same direction I am, which is I want to do what's right for my body. I want to do what's best for me and my health. And also, outwardly, for the environment and for the rest of the planet, what can we do? How can we scale this and all these sorts of things? And I think that answer is meat and animals. And when you talk about these things, a lot of people tend to agree. They look at the evidence and say like, wow, actually, I didn't realize that, but that makes sense. And so there are a lot of people coming from a plant-based way of eating to a more animal-based way of eating, or even a full carnivore way of eating, they're finding dramatic health effects and health benefits, and they're also seeing that actually, properly managed livestock can actually be very, very beneficial to the environment and the rest of the world.
So recently, I saw a documentary that was talking about had several doctors on there talking about how red meat causes diabetes.
Mm.
So aren't you concerned about getting type 2 diabetes from all the meat you're consuming?
Yeah. No, because I actually understand biochemistry. And so I mean that's the funny thing. When people just remove carbohydrates. I mean, we have this in large human clinical trials showing that if you remove carbohydrates, that diabetes goes away. Type 2 diabetes goes away, and type 1 diabetes is much more easily controlled, and you just use a minimal amount of insulin. One of the arguments that they say, like a ketogenic diet in general, or carnivore diet, which is generally a ketogenic diet should be, is that how that can cause insulin resistance. This is a sleight of hand, because they're saying that, well, when you have someone who's on a ketogenic diet, after a few months, you give them a glucose tolerance test, and that has this big high response. There's a high number, so that means that they have high insulin or insulin resistance, right? No, not necessarily. It just means that their glucose went up. That doesn't mean they have insulin resistance, because what was their insulin level? What was their fasting insulin level? And what was their insulin level directly after that test? The insulin level will actually be very low, because when you're eating a lot of carbohydrates and you're chronically eating carbohydrates, this is bad for your body. This causes harm. High blood sugar causes harm to your body. So your body has to protect itself, from you. And it preloads insulin in your pancreas. And so it's there ready made, because it's expecting this toxic level of insult to happen at any time. And so it has to be ready to respond right away, or else you're going to be harmed. And the body's very, very good at protecting you. And so you actually pre-make insulin, so they're ready for you. You eat carbohydrates, and bang, it knocks it out. Now that eventually will start to subside, and that response, that physiological response, and maybe it won't be able to take care of it because of insulin resistance, or because you're not able to make enough insulin at a certain point when you've burnt your pancreas out. But when you stop eating carbohydrates, your body doesn't need to pre-make insulin. It's just making this very low grade amount of insulin all the time, because you're making carbohydrates, but you're making the right amount of carbohydrates naturally through gluconeogenesis, which is demand driven, right? So your body needs a certain amount of carbs, so it makes a certain amount of carbs, and it has a very low level of insulin necessary to utilize that. So if you're not pre-making the insulin, what happens when you eat a lot of carbs? Well, your blood sugar level goes up, and you don't have this pre-made insulin to knock it down really very quickly. So the response is delayed, but it happens. It does come down after that. And so what people take that to mean is that, well, that's insulin resistance then. No, that's not what that means. That's not what that test shows. All that test shows is that your blood sugar went up. That's it. And then you're inferring the reason why after that. But there are other reasons why that blood sugar can be up, and that's it. And so after a few days, if you continue to eat carbohydrates, your body will just start pre-making insulin again, and then it will release that out, and you'll actually find that people have less insulin resistance. They have a better response on the glucose tolerance test after a few days when their body starts pre-making insulin. This simple fact that you can reverse type 2 diabetes by removing carbohydrates, but not by removing meat, should tell you everything you need to know about that statement of theirs. Also, insulin resistance. What is insulin resistance, right? It's, you have chronically high insulin, and, your body just in a chronically high blood sugar, and your body just starts dampening down the response to insulin, because you're getting this overload. Just like if you do any sort of drug and you have too much of this chemical in your body builds up a tolerance to it, starts reducing the amount of receptors available, because it's just getting too much signal. And so it doesn't want that much signal. And so, you start getting more resistance. Fat does not drive insulin. right? So it's not insulinogenic. So it's not going to cause an insulin response. It's not going to cause you to create more insulin. And protein, very low insulin response, even on the the in a normal setting. When you're eating carbohydrates, you'll have a slightly higher response with the protein. But if you're not eating carbohydrates at all, it's a very, very small bump in your blood sugar levels, which will make a very small response with your insulin levels. So the idea that you can get insulin resistance from eating in a way that doesn't really affect your insulin by and large is a bit funny. I mean, I guess you could say something about the Randall cycle, where when fat and carbohydrates go into a cell, it'll sort of lock it down, and you'll sort of get resistance at that point, because the cells, it's like, hey, we have too much energy, we don't want to overload our cells, so we sort of block it out. And so if you're eating fat, then it blocks out the carbs, and you're eating carbs, it blocks out the fat and all that sort of stuff. Well, simple solution: don't eat carbs again, and you won't have that problem. And so, and there's fat in plants, there's fat in all sorts of different things, and you need fat. Fat is not just a calorie source, it's an essential nutrient. Animal fats in particular, there's a lot of fats that we have to have that we just can't get from plants. You need them from meat, because we don't really make them very well ourselves, like DHA, EPA. And people will say, well, you can turn in other fatty acids from plants into DHA and EPA. Like, not really. There are mixed studies. Some say, yeah, no, we're not really seeing any crossover. And others saying, oh yeah, you can get a bit. But even the ones that say you can get a bit, it's very small. It's like single digit percentages of turning in ALA into DHA and EPA. So you're not going to get enough anyway. You really do need this. So if you're eating fat, so if you're arguing the Randall cycle, well, okay, well then you're just not going to eat any fat from plants as well, because that's going to compete with these carbohydrates. But either way, it's fat and carbohydrates. It's not meat. What is in meat that's causing diabetes, right? And if it's fat, why is it animal fat? That should be all fats, plant and animal fat. So you can't say meat causes diabetes or animal fat causes diabetes. Maybe you can say that because of the Randall cycle, any fat competing with carbohydrates can cause some sort of resistance. You could argue that. Again, just don't eat carbohydrates, because you don't need carbohydrates. There's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. There are such things as essential fatty acids. So if you're going to pick between the two, I personally would go for the fatty acids. But there's nothing inherent in meat that's just going to cause diabetes. So I think this is just a sleight of hand play, and it's just another attempt to defend their ideology and their narrative that doesn't line up with biochemistry, doesn't line up with biology, it doesn't line up with the observable facts and data. And it's just people trying to defend an undefendable position. Really, it's an untenable position, and it's getting more and more obvious that it is, and they come up with more and more excuses as to why it's not, because they've built their entire careers and reputations on the fact that we're herbivores against all the available data.
So, I mean, that's an interesting point, right? Like, they built their careers on this, but like, has medicine and science always been this way? Like, there's kind of two camps, or like, how did we get to this point?
Well, I mean, in science, you should have many, many different voices having many, many different opinions and views, and they should be basing that on facts and evidence. And unfortunately, personal motivations do come into play. Some people say that science advances one funeral at a time, because you'll get someone who is the grand poobah guru of whatever field, and that person drives the scientific endeavor for his career or her career. And then when they die, other people are like, okay, now there's some, when a big tree falls down in the forest, all of a sudden, the little trees are like, oh, sweet Jesus, get in some sunlight, and they can grow up. And so it's the same idea, that someone has so much clout and so much authority that you can't really edge them out. And it does happen, though. I mean, some people will make a presentation and say, hey, look, this is the evidence for X, Y, and Z. And some people will be, very, well, I think appropriate in saying, like, okay, look, wow, that disproved 20 years of work, and like, that's amazing. And they can be happy about that. Go, oh, great, that's moved science on, because they're honest people. And it doesn't happen always. but it does happen. It can happen. And that's when, someone said, the difference between religion and science is that sometimes that can happen. And religion is like, nope, this is always it. That's always the way. And so when someone's very dogmatic and said there's absolutely no chance that anything can be different, they're just finding excuses and fudge factors and reasons why, it's still their way. You're dealing with an ideology as opposed to a scientific endeavor. But you're always going to have people in disagreement, and that's good, because you want people looking at things from different angles. You want people challenging other people. I'm happy to be challenged. I want to be challenged because I don't want to be wrong. Like, I don't want to be suggesting this stuff and saying these things, and then people go and use it and don't get optimal health out of it. I feel optimal out of it. I feel optimized out of it. My patients, they reverse insane diseases that 5 years ago people would say that's not possible to reverse that, and yet we're seeing that, and now we're seeing clinical trials proving that. And so this is a very exciting time to be in, that we can actually undo a lot of the harm that has been built up over the last century or so of misinformation and bad science. But that's a problem too. We have vested interests, financial vested interests in the different food and drug companies in pushing their product. And so they've put out industry funded research, and sometimes industry funded research that they don't disclose is industry funded research, which is illegal and unethical. And we have documentation of this. The Sugar Foundation, now called the Sugar Association, and back in the 50s and 60s, they were paying off different professors and researchers and doctors in America to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease when it was really sugar. Ansel Keys was one of these. There were several from Harvard and other institutions as well. Very famous, well-regarded, and well-renowned scientists and researchers that people really respected. And so they had a lot of clout. They had a lot of push. And no one would go against them because they're like, no, you just stay out of that space, because these guys they're just these monoliths that you just can't go against. Like, you'll destroy your career if you try and combat these guys. And there are people that were going against them, though. And this was a hotly debated subject for decades. I remember looking at a Journal of American Medical Association publication in 1956, where the author was talking about how, it's generally accepted in the medical community that high cholesterol, is a driver for heart disease. But this is based on really poor evidence and really bad studies. And they just went through all the studies this was based on and just actually tore them down and showed how terrible they were and how we shouldn't be changing our entire practice of medicine based on these very poor studies, which we now know are actually fraudulent. They were made up. They had fudged the numbers. And what we know from a publication in the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, in 2016, that was published by the University of California, San Francisco Medical School, that they found in actual internal memos from those sugar companies, Sugar Foundation, back at that time, detailing how they were paying off these different people and their contracts. We know what they got paid. It was $6,500 back then, which is only about $50,000 now. It's really nothing, I mean, it's not even, a normal, I mean, what is it, like a mid-sized sedan? You got a Camry out of it. That was what your integrity was worth. And that's not worth it to me. And, those documents actually showed that one of these professors was named head of the USDA, and it was he who authored and published the 1977 declaration saying that cholesterol caused heart disease and saturated fat increased cholesterol, and to stop eating both. And that it dramatically changed the landscape, because now this wasn't a topic for debate. Everyone that was debating this and arguing this against it, saying, no, look, I think it's sugar. The evidence shows this, and there's books written about this, dozens of papers written about it, and in peer-reviewed literature. And yet it was completely thrown by the wayside, because they said, no, look, the official line is that cholesterol causes heart disease, and so we won't broach any argument after that. And it destroyed the careers of these people who turned out to be right, and were trying to help people. And the people who were bought and paid for are the ones that ended up winning out in the end. So it's a bit of a minefield. You have a lot of different interests competing for airtime. But we as the consumer, or as physicians and clinicians trying to figure out the best evidence with which to help our patients, it's very difficult. And we have to piece through and parse through all of these different things and sort of find what the best evidence is to standardize our practice and to make recommendations to patients and for people just to live their lives. Well, what am I supposed to do? We've always eaten meat, we've always eaten fat, haven't really had these rates of diabetes and heart disease and cancer and all the rest. And yet we said, okay, no, not supposed to eat any fat. So, okay, I'm not eating fat, but I'm actually getting worse and I don't feel good and I'm getting all these diseases. You're saying I'm only supposed to get by eating meat and fat. And then I eat meat and fat and all those diseases go away. What are you supposed to believe? Well, I think you believe what's in front of your face, which is you start eating a certain way and you get better and your diseases go away and you come off medication and your blood pressure goes down. I think that's what you look at. And the idea that meat causes diabetes and yet going on a meat only diet cures diabetes is a bit of a ludicrous statement.
It's a bit like they're almost saying, don't believe your lying eyes. It's like, just this is what I'm telling you to do. Don't believe anything that actually helps you. Just take this statin or do whatever. So in Australia, I remember growing up a product called Wheat Bix, which is made by a company called Sanitarium. And I didn't know anything about them at the time. I just remember the TV commercial was really annoying because it's still stuck in my head. This when something like Aussie kids are Wheat Bix kids on repeat, and it was just like over and over and over and over again. So I've since understood that Sanitarium is actually a part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And that the Seventh-day Adventist Church has been quite heavily into nutrition and nutrition guidelines, their idea is, again, as far as I'm aware, against anything to do with saturated fat and promoting plant-based eating and so forth. Do you ever come across anything like this in your daily work or daily life regarding, say, Sanitarium or food guidelines produced by the Adventist Church?
Well, basically all the food guidelines are influenced by the Adventist Church because they have had such a deep influence in nutritional sciences from the beginning. If I'm not mistaken, they founded nutritional sciences and the study of nutritional endeavor back in 1917. So the official study at the university level of nutritional sciences that came from the Seventh-day Adventists, who, as people may know, are religiously anti-meat. They think that meat causes lustful feelings and maybe lustful actions. And since lust is a sin, therefore meat is a sin by the transferred property. So I guess, but so that's something that makes you do evil things. And so obviously it's an evil thing in and of itself. Obviously, what this is you're eating more meat, you're getting more hormonally healthy, and you're getting, and your reproductive health is a benchmark sign of your overall health. And if you're not feeling like reproducing, if you're not feeling like having kids and having sex and doing those sorts of acts that beget the next generation, then there's something wrong. You're not healthy in some way, mentally, physically, hormonally, something like that. We notice this in animals. That's one of the benchmarks that we look for health in different lab animals, cats, mice, gorillas, whatever, in the zoo. If they're not reproducing, if they're not interested in reproduction, something's wrong. And so that's something that's been a benchmark in the sciences when studying animals for a very long time. So not eating meat makes you less healthy, and that makes you not necessarily want to fornicate. Maybe that makes you less fertile as well, and it can certainly less fertile. I'm not saying that you can't have kids, but it could be more difficult. Fertility rates have dropped by over 50%. Sperm counts have dropped by around the same. Testosterone levels in men have dropped by, I think, 55% since the 1970s. So, this is something that's dramatically affecting us, and we're going more and more plant-based. We're eating less and less meat. We're especially eating less and less fatty meat, which is very important. Again, this is a vital nutrient. It's not just a calorie source. And so you will see a lot of these influences. This is why most nutritional science courses, especially at the graduate, postgraduate level, master's or PhD programs, and just in nutritional sciences, these are basically all plant-based. They're just pushing plants. I think the top nutritional, doctoral nutrition program in America is a place called Bastyr in Kirkland, Washington, which is near where I grew up. So I knew a number of people that actually went to Bastyr, because you run into these people because they live right next to you. And that was what it was. It was just pushing plant, like whole food, plant-based diet. Like that was what they were pushing. If you can't, as a nutritionist, if you're pushing for a diet that can't even get you the basic requisite nutrients for life, how can you argue that is our optimal nutrition? That doesn't make any sense to me. You can't get B12, D3, or K2. You'll never get enough vitamin A, because you'd have to eat 6 pounds of carrots, like 2.5 kilos of carrots a day, to get enough vitamin A. You'll never get DHA, EPA. They don't exist there. You can't really convert ALA into DHA and EPA, or enough of it. We don't really make enough of it ourselves. You can get a bit of it. I guess you could eke by, but this is not going to be optimal. You're not going to have an optimal development as a child. You're not going to have optimal growth, development, and maintenance of your brain as an adult, and especially an elderly adult. These are very important structures, or important precursors for structures in our brain. Our brain is physically made out of these fats. 70% of our brain is made out of fat. 20% of that fat is DHA. So this is very, very important to build and maintain this. You don't just like build it up and it just sticks there and that's it, and it just never changes. No, you actually need to keep supplying it and keep rebuilding it and keep remaking and remodeling your brain. So you can't even get those basic nutrients, and forget for a second all the toxins that are in plants. You cannot get a basic complement of nutrients from plants. So why are we even having this discussion? It's honestly just a very silly discussion, and especially for a nutritionist who should damn well know that. Like, which nutrients we need, and that they're lacking in plants. Like why are we trying to pretend that this is an optimal diet? So you see their little fingers stuck into everything, unfortunately, and all these big nutritional studies, epidemiological studies, they come out of Loma Linda Medical Center, which is a Seventh-day Adventist hospital and medical school. And the Adventist study, this is something that's widely quoted in the vegan circles. Oh, the Adventist study. Well, the Seventh-day Adventist study. This is studying the Seventh-day Adventists by Seventh-day Adventists. Okay. And, they look at different health outcomes and longevity and things like that with the Seventh-day Adventists, and they're comparing it to the general population in America, but that's not exactly accurate, because, they're religiously compelled to not eat meat, but they're also religiously compelled to not do other things. They're not eating processed foods and crap like that necessarily. They're eating whole foods, which is going to make a big difference, just getting rid of processed carbs and sugar, which, newsflash, come from plants, right? And they also don't smoke, don't drink, don't do drugs, don't participate in lascivious behavior and other sorts of dangerous behaviors. That's going to make a big difference in survival. And when we talk about all-cause mortality, someone dies in an extreme sport or because they're driving too fast. It doesn't matter what they had for breakfast that day. Right, that's something else. But what about death rates in heart disease and cancer and all these sorts of things? So all cause mortality is a bit of a weird one for me. But either way, their all cause mortality. Okay, maybe that's a bit higher. Maybe they have or they have a higher life expectancy and fine. But there are other factors going on there, and when you compare them to another group, the Mormons in America, who eat whatever the hell they want to eat. They have no sort of religious compulsions one way or the other. They don't smoke. They don't drink. They don't do drugs by and large. And they also have the exact same increased life expectancy as the Seventh-day Adventist. So, there are other things going on here. And, so you can't say that that's just the diet. So these are dishonest studies. They have a lot of confounding factors. They have a lot of different influences, but they're saying it's because of plants. It's because they're eating plants, and that's what it is. Well, actually, it's not. There's a lot of other things that are going in there. And so you can't say it's one thing because you didn't do a randomized controlled trial where you only changed one variable. And even when people go vegan, they generally don't change one variable. They don't just drop meat. They generally go to a whole food diet. They stop eating processed garbage. They stop going out to eat. They stop eating a bunch of sugar, drinking sodas, drinking alcohol, smoking. All of these things are plants. They're plant products. They're plant food. And they're stopping them because they're worse than other alternatives. And they got rid of meat because they threw the baby out with the bathwater. The meat was doing just fine. That was the only thing keeping them together for many years. It was just all the processed garbage that they were eating that was very harmful, and drinking alcohol and smoking cigarettes. All plants. So they went to, whole food vegan diet or whole food vegetarian diet. And oh wow, they got so much better. Like I'm not surprised. Like no one is saying that you stop eating cake, muffins, and soda and drinking alcohol that you're going to not get an improvement. I don't think anyone would argue that. The problem is that you're conflating that with the elimination of meat, because at the same time you eliminated meat. Right. But that doesn't actually track. You have too many variables to say which variable was the correct one.
Interesting. So what about, like, one of the things I've heard from people, like I'll get angry comments a lot on my YouTube channel. Often YouTube actually does a really good job of filtering these out, but I'll get a lot of angry comments. And one of the kind of less angry parts that they tend to comment is, what about the phytonutrients? You're not getting any phytonutrients. Why do we need phytonutrients?
We don't. I mean, what about the phytonutrients?
Yeah.
That's the thing. Where were the phytonutrients when people were going through the ice ages? Where are the phytonutrients up at the North Pole with the Inuit, who traditionally only eat meat? If you are losing out on nutrients, you cannot live generationally. You can't live generation after generation for tens of thousands of years through ice ages, for hundreds of thousands of years throughout the history of Homo sapiens, throughout the millions of years of the history of humanity in general. Right. So that's just a non-starter for me. They haven't proven that you need these things. They say, like, well, you need these phytonutrients. Okay. Says who? According to what? What's your evidence for that? So they have to prove that first. They have to show evidence first that we actually need phytonutrients before you even need to address, why we don't. I mean, it's very obvious that we don't, because there are many people who don't ever eat these things and live generation after generation after generation. And we know from not having rocks in our head that if you don't have the adequate nutrients and nutrition, that you're after a couple of generations, you may not be able to reproduce at all. You may not be compatible with life, because if it's an essential nutrient, it's essential for life. You cannot live without it past a certain point. They call fiber an essential nutrient. Why would fiber be an essential nutrient? Fiber is not even a nutrient, so it can't even be an essential nutrient. You can't break it down. You can't absorb it. You can't get any use out of it. So how are we calling fiber an essential nutrient? That's insane. And so, there's a study with called Pottinger's cats, where they had cats and they fed them raw meat and cooked meat. Same meat. It's just one was cooked, one was raw. And they found that the raw food cats were doing much better, and the cooked ones were not as healthy. And they had surgery, and none of them were surviving surgery. All the raw meat cats were surviving surgery. Is that okay? Is there a difference here in the nutritional value from cooking meat as opposed to raw meat for cats? Humans have been cooking meat for about 800,000 years at least. I mean, there's evidence that we've been using ovens for about 800,000 years, or some sort of oven-like device. And so we're well accustomed to cooking meat. But in cats, obviously, they don't have thumbs and they're not making fire, so they don't eat cooked meat generally. And so for them, they actually were losing out on some nutrients. And they found that the next generation of cats that were fed cooked meat actually got worse. They were smaller stature. They had worse, bone density, worse mineralization. Their face and their brains weren't as developed, weren't as large. They were on average smaller size. They were less interested in sex. They were less interested in play. They were less interested in just being cats. And then the subsequent generation was even worse, and they were very sickly. Their bone mineral density was like down to 3%, very, very low, down from 14% down to 3%. And their bones, they said, were like, foam rubber. They were just not holding together. One cat had something like 46 different fractures all throughout its body. This poor little thing was just breaking apart because its bones were so fragile. They weren't interested in sex at all. They weren't playing at all. They were very unhealthy. Their face and their zygomatic arch, their cheekbones were even less well developed. Their brains were even less well developed and smaller, and their stature was smaller as well. And then after 3 generations, they couldn't even reproduce. They weren't interested in it. The ones that they could actually get to mate then and weren't getting pregnant, and the ones that were had stillbirths. So that shows you that losing out even on a little bit of nutrients and just not getting enough of certain nutrients will have lasting effects, and eventually your line will die out. You have to have these nutrients. They will run, you will run out and you will die. You will not be able to go on if you're that. And also, I mean, were they going to survive in the wild? Never. That 3rd generation of cats, that's not conducive for life. They would all just been taken out by badger or whatever the hell came across them, because they weren't able to defend themselves. They weren't able to live, right? And so they wouldn't have survived in the wild. They were in captivity, so that's the only reason that they were even able to get food. They wouldn't have been able to hunt or anything. So not conducive with life. They also found that once they started giving them raw meat again in that 3rd generation, they actually started getting healthy again. They started being able to get healthy and mate and do normal things. But the next generation of cats didn't go back to the origin, didn't go back to what the raw meat, and the raw meat cats all this whole time were just perfect every generation. And then when they started feeding them raw meat again, after 3 generations, they were able to mate. They were able to get healthy again. Their reproductive health came back online. Their body started working more normally. They weren't going to develop again. They were still small with smaller brains, but they were able to at least, go on. They then had kids, and that next generation wasn't like the raw meat cats. It took 4 generations to get back to to where their stature was at the raw meat. Was consistently generation after generation. So if you're thinking about surviving an ice age or surviving up in the North Pole, look at the accounts of these polar explorers that all went up there and died. There's famous stories, down in Antarctica, I'm going out now, I may be some time. And he was just like, he knew he was going to die. He was just dragging down his partner. And it's just like, okay, well, if I go out and just let myself go to the elements, he might have enough supplies and things like that to make it. Unfortunately, he didn't make it, but it was one of the more noble things that has been done, and or it can be done. It's the ultimate sacrifice. So these are horribly harsh conditions, and when the ice ages we're sort of still in an ice age, but when the ice ages were much more pronounced, and these big ice sheets and shelves were much more down towards the equator. You either thrived or you died. There's no 2 ways about it. And if you're sort of nutrient deprived because you're only eating meat, because there's only meat available, and you're living as the Inuits do traditionally up towards the North Pole, where you're just living on ice shelves and you're just hunting and eating meat all day, every day, then if you can't get the requisite, not even the requisite, but the best nutrition, you're going to die. Like you can't just eke out an ice age. The conditions are far too hard. So even the polar explorers that were very well outfitted, kitted out with modern equipment and supplies, a lot of them died. These are horrible conditions, and these guys prepped and trained and prepared for months, if not more, to survive these things, and a lot of them didn't survive. And there's people that just live out there. for thousands of years. And how do they do that if they're just so nutrient deprived and just like lacking all these phytonutrients? They, first of all, they wouldn't survive. They wouldn't make it past a couple generations, if that, and they wouldn't be able to survive and thrive. And that's just something that you cannot do unless you're in optimal health. And so, when people say, well, we were actually going down towards this is another thing. There's a lot of assertions that are based on no evidence, and there's just no evidence either asked for or provided by these people, and then they just believe it because they want to believe it, because there's a narrative involved that they are holding to. And so one of them was, oh, well, when the ice ages were there, everyone just migrated towards the south, towards the equator, and just hung around the equator. I'm like, where'd you get that from? All of the fossil records show that the exact opposite, that when the ice shelves were coming down, humans started going up into the ice shelves. And presumably that's where the megafauna was. That's where the mammoths were. That's where their food was. That's where their desired prey was. And so actually, there's a lot of people that were living up in the ice shelves that had no access to plants at any time of the year. And maybe seasonally for a month or two during a thaw, you could get something, maybe, but you're arguing then that, that's they just ate all of it, and they just carried packs of grass clippings around with them through the ice. There's no evidence for that. There's absolutely no evidence for that. There is evidence that we ate a lot of meat. There is evidence that we get everything we need from meat in the proportion that we need it from meat, that is perfectly bioavailable and doesn't have anything that harms us, and that our civilization is alive right now, and historically we have clear documentation of that exclusively ate meat or nearly exclusively ate meat. And they were some of the most dominant empires ever. Genghis Khan and the Mongol horde, they were predominantly carnivores. Maybe some people had something else, maybe, but predominantly they drank horse blood, ate horse meat, and fermented mare's milk. And they're horribly lactose intolerant even to this day. So it was always fermented dairy products but just blood and meat primarily. And so they carved out the largest contiguous empire that's ever existed. There's accounts of these people being so big and so strong that they could just cleave these little peasant warriors that they were fighting against, these little peasant conscript armies. They would just cleave them in half because they were so big and so strong. And that the little peasant armies, they were just much smaller in stature, and they were just so weak. They're just eating gruel and nonsense, and they couldn't even pierce the armor of these Mongols. They weren't strong enough to, and the Mongols were just cutting through them. So they just absolutely just ravaged the countryside, and they were eating meat, and so maybe people say, oh, well, they had this other stuff, maybe, but the primary focus of their diet was meat, blood, and dairy products, fermented dairy products. And there are other places that, like the Maasai. This is funny. The Maasai have been known for centuries to be eating animal based. So dairy, blood, meat. That's it, really. Maybe they had something else if they chose to, or they, didn't have access to food or whatever. But this is documented going back centuries that this is what they ate. And now people are making, oh no, actually they're mostly plant based. Actually, they almost never drink blood. They almost never drink milk. It's actually mostly plant based. Like, where are you getting this from? It's just someone asserts this, and then people just, without looking into it or asking for any evidence, they just say, oh yeah, Maasai are just plant-based. They're just plant-based. Oh yeah.
The trouble is, when people just repeat that kind of stuff enough,
that's it.
Then people just start believing it, and it just spreads and spreads,
It's very funny. Well, it's that protecting that ideology. You want to believe something, and so you get this confirmation bias. Someone says something that supports your position, and so you don't look into it. You just say, oh, yeah, okay, that's a thing. You need to look into it. And so, this is why, I try to put, when I'm talking about specific subjects, like I put different studies and references in the description that people can look up, and they can form their own opinions. I looked at this evidence and I came to one conclusion. Maybe other people look at it and come to a different conclusion. That's fine. It's okay. It's actually, that's like, I think a good working definition of being open-minded is understanding that two people can look at the same information and intelligently and honestly come to different conclusions. That's okay. But what's not okay is just following things dogmatically and not asking for evidence, and just repeating and regurgitating things without actually seeing on what it's based on. And I think more and more people are coming to an animal-based approach or even a carnivore diet approach because they start asking those questions. They start asking for the evidence. They start asking for proof, and they start finding that it's really only stacked up on one side.
Yeah. So, Anthony, I really appreciate your time today, and I realize you're very busy, but if you'll indulge me in one last question, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a question that I haven't heard asked at all. I'd really like your take on where you think we're going. So there's this massive push, bigger than it's ever been before, for everyone to go plant-based or more plant-based. There's more plant-based burgers, et cetera, et cetera. And meat is more kind of demonized than it's ever been. Where will we be 20 years from now?
Well, yeah, hopefully that will sort itself out. I mean, there is a big push for plant-based eating. I think it's mostly financially driven. There's a lot of money to be made, and that was something that was clearly said in like the Impossible Burger. Those people that said like, look, this is a multi-billion-dollar, multi-trillion-dollar industry, and so this is something that we can make some inroads. So we put in a few $billion trying to develop these things. That's a big. We get even part of that market share, will be good. So I think there's definitely a big financial push. There's other pushes as well that may or may not be financially driven, which are sort of strange in general. I mean, and if you look historically, I mean, even the Romans, when people were getting a bit more rebellious and uppity, they cut off the meat supply. That was the first thing they did, and then they started handing out bread and putting on shows. So bread and circuses. That's what they did to appease the masses. But the other side of that coin was that they cut off the meat supply. It was specifically bread and circus, not steaks and circus, right? So that was, I think that was probably for a good reason. And other examples throughout history of different sorts of powers like the British or other empires that would cut off the meat supply or limit the meat supply in certain areas, and that may or may not have been driven by the fact that maybe that keeps people a bit less healthy and a bit more docile. You can't always ascribe motivations to people, hundreds of years after the fact, but we do know that these things happened. So whatever the motivations are now, I agree, there's being big pushes for them at the moment. And the vilification of meat, I mean, that's been going on for 70 years or so. And that is absolutely financially driven by the sugar company, or at least started out being driven by the sugar companies. And then obviously the Seventh-day Adventists have had their dirty little fingers in things for a century now, and they're still at play. They're still at work, and they're very, very large and powerful entities at this point. Belinda Fettke of Tasmania, she actually did a ton of research on this, looking at how ingrained the Seventh-day Adventists are in nutritional scientists around the world, even today. But there are more and more and more people coming to understand that that's completely wrong, and that these are being influenced by sort of unethical and moral and dishonest reasons, that these are being pushed for financial and personal gain rather than by the goodness of their heart to try to help other people. People like Sean Baker and Dr. Paul Mason and Dr. Ken Berry and somebody myself, like we have day jobs, like we have other things that we can do, like we're doing this. And Dr. Ovadia, I mean, he's a cardiothoracic surgeon. That guy makes a ton of money just doing his job, and yet he's taking time out. He's not doing as many surgeries. He's not seeing as many patients one-on-one, because he's trying to reach a broader audience and saying, hey, this helps people. This gets more people not having to go, and get these surgeries in the first place. He makes cardiothoracic surgeons per surgery. I mean, they're very dangerous surgery. They're extremely technically difficult. You're operating on a beating heart, and so you have to time your stitches with the heartbeat, right? Because there's a bump, contract, and there's a pause, like a brief pause, sometimes less than a second. Brief pause. That's when you stitch. That's when you stitch. That's when you stitch. And so it's very technically demanding. It's very difficult. It's very dangerous. And so, it's very well compensated for. And he wrote a book titled Stay Off My Operating Table. He is trying to educate people to never have to use his services again. Who does that? If it's for their own personal best interests, right? I mean, he could just keep saying like, yeah, go keep drinking sugar. Yeah, no, meat's bad. Oh, don't want that meat, and he'll just be living in luxury for the rest of his life, just doing all these surgeries for people who unfortunately took this bad advice, and he's not, he's trying to help people. He's doing something that will make him lose money in the long run. Right. So where are the motivations there? I think they would be very, very benevolent motivations. So more and more people are seeing that. More and more people are coming around to this. More and more people are remembering 50 years ago, this was an absurd, ludicrous suggestion, and that we had hundreds of years of actual scientific study, endeavor, and published peer-reviewed research showing that there are a lot of these plants, and I mean, the research for oxalate goes back 200 years, in very, very well regarded scientific journals, and yet we're now saying no, they're super good for you, and don't look at the man behind the curtain, everything's fine. So I think people are starting to understand that that they've been conned, and that we've all been conned, and we've been duped, and then they can see with their own eyes that when they try something else, they go like, damn it, look at that. Everything's getting better, and I'm doing the opposite of what they suggested. And now a lot of people are getting, sort of the wool taken off their eyes, saying, okay, well, they lied to us about that for the last 50 years. What the hell else are they lying to us about? Which I think is a good, that healthy amount of skepticism, especially of, the government and the people in power and in control, is very, very healthy. That's something that you have to have, because if you're not watching these guys like a hawk, they are going to try and get away with stuff. And that's been the history of politics forever. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so the more power some of these people get, the more corrupt they become. Not everyone, there are people that actually get into politics for the right reasons.
That's the minority, though, I would imagine.
It absolutely is, because for 150 years of American history, you really actually, it was a public service. That's what they call this. I'm a public servant, all that sort of thing, because people would actually, leave their jobs and their careers, and they would lose money coming in and working in, the House of Congress or Senate, or even becoming president. Most presidents lost a lot of money until very recently. They started getting a lot more money, and leaving the White House multi millionaires. You get paid few $100,000 a year being president. And Barack Obama, he had other sorts of things like a Netflix deal and a book deal and all these sorts of things. But, all of a sudden he has a $15 million mansion on the water in Martha's Vineyard. Okay. So, it is a bit more lucrative now. And, as I believe it was President Harry Truman said, the only way to get rich in Washington, Washington, D.C., is if you're corrupt. And now you're seeing all these politicians that make $140,000 a year, $160,000 a year, worth $86 million. Nancy Pelosi is a very, very wealthy woman, but her salary is not all that high. And so there are a lot of different reasons for that. But, you can, if you have a lot of power and control, and you control the purse strings of trillions of dollars, you have a lot to sell. You have a lot of authority, you have a lot of money, you have a lot of power with which you can profit from. Where for 150 years in American history, before FDR sort of opened things up and sort of made the federal government much more big and much more powerful, they didn't have anything to sell. And so maybe they tried that, but their positions in play and how they structure the sort of the three tiers of federal government in America, they're sort of fighting against each other, trying to keep each other down. And now that's sort of exploded. And so now there's a lot of power with which to sell. So it's very easy to do that. So it's attracting the wrong people. Whereas before, it would attract more people that would say, okay, well, look, I think that I think I'm the best man for the job. I think I want to do this. I want to try and help people. it would attract more of those people because it was very hard. I mean, you could, I mean, there were ways of corrupting anything, but it was more difficult. Now it's very easy. You have lobbyists coming to you every single day saying all the things that they're going to give you and do for you. And, you know, that transfer from going from public office to the private sector is, you know, right. You have people that work in the FDA, and then they leave the FDA and they get some, you know, board position, you know, for Pfizer or Merck. You know, I mean, that was a deal that was made 10 years ago. You know, and they say, hey, you let our things through, you do these, you scratch our back, we'll scratch yours. When you leave the FDA, you'll have a sweet spot with a retirement package waiting for you.
Scary. It's
You
so
know?
scary.
Yeah. And so, you know, that it attracts that kind of person now. You know, so there are politicians that are like fed up and pissed off, you know, like you and I would be like, okay, no, look, someone has to do something about this. They're swimming upstream because you know how things are set up in any political structure is that it's conducive to perpetuating that beast because everyone's profiting from this. And so the different sort of political parties that profit from this, they don't want someone coming in rocking the boat. You know, they're very happy with the status quo. And so it is difficult. Yeah, you're right. And so mostly the politicians that get involved in politics now are the ones that want to profit from this. They're attracted to this because they want that personal gain as opposed to helping actual people. So that's why we have to do it from grassroots. That's why we have to do it from the ground up. That's why we have to, you know, have these conversations and reach as many people as we can. Say, look, this is the evidence and how I interpret it. Maybe you interpret it differently, but this is what I'm doing with my life. This is what I've been doing with my patients, and these are the things that I've been suggesting. And these are the results I'm getting. I'm getting amazing results. I'm reversing, you know, things in people, or they're reversing things. They're the ones doing it. They're changing their diet and they're reversing diseases that people said, like, no, that's not possible. You can't do that. Well, I'm sorry, but it is. I've seen it every single day, and we're seeing more and more studies come out actually showing this with cancer, with autoimmune diseases, with diabetes. These things go away if you stop eating these things that we're not biologically designed to eat.
If people want to reach out to you, if people want to watch your videos, how can they get in contact?
Yeah, so I have a YouTube channel. It's just Anthony Chaffee, MD, and then an Instagram by the same handle, Anthony Chaffee, MD, and my podcast, which can be found on any podcast platform, is just called The Plant Free MD, and sort of maybe just sort of a bit of a catchy name, but that I think it gets the point across that, you know, just avoid plants. And that's why I came to a carnivore diet in the first place, is I just learned how toxic plants were to humans. So, okay, I don't want to eat them. And I got a lot of benefits from that. And so we talk about as much of the science and data and background in all these things that we can. So if people are interested in that, they're welcome to check it out. And I have other social media sort of links that can be found through all of those.
Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on today, Anthony.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Guys, thanks for watching. Please don't forget to click like and subscribe, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video.